Hi everyone, this is Ali and today we will be doing a practice session for HTML images and trying out different features we showcased in our definitive guide to HTML images video. Since we covered the concepts in that video, we would focus on writing the HTML code here, and I would strongly suggest to watch that video first since we discussed all the concepts in detail. The link should be appearing on top right corner right about now, and I'll provide in description too. Additionally, you can always jump to a concept of your choice by using chapter links in description or the scroll bar. The definitive guide starts by discussing the image tag and its primary attributes, which we shall recap here. However, the topics of delayed rendering and width and height attributes have been covered in excruciating detail in our video HTML Images plus Introduction to HTML Rendering, where we covered how to simulate a slow network in Chrome Developer Tools and see how browsers process HTML and image tags within them using the amazing options in its network tab. In follow-up video, I shall cover how to optimize it even more by using scripts and placeholder images, but again a topic we are skipping as it is already covered in detail. Link to that video given in description and about to appear in top right corner. Please watch it if you haven't. HTML positioning and text overlay, that is text over images, is also going to be deferred to a later video. So this makes our first order of business to be discussing the units of measure in CSS. Let's jump right over to Visual Studio Code and start from where we left. Alright, let me start by creating a new file here called native.html. Okay, let me organize the source a little bit more. Right, let me start by creating a HTML document and add an image element. So I'm going to be using image. Source would be a bit different this time because it's coming from one folder up in the images folder because we have moved our items around, and I'm going to be using face.png as before. Alright, going to give the necessary alt attribute and call it face. Okay, right. So let me start by introducing a width element attribute as before and providing a value, let's say 200. So the width attribute is measured in unit of pixels by default, and if you don't specify any units, it's pixels. And to specify pixels, we use the px. And pixel is an absolute unit of measure. It is a term borrowed from earlier times when the CRT monitors, etc., used to have physical pixels that used to light up, and there were a fixed number of those points on the screen. So the physical pixel and let's call them CSS pixels, they used to match. But in today's world, the monitors have a concept of pixel density, so it doesn't need to be a one-to-one match between a physical pixel and a relative pixel, although two screens with the same resolution would respond or behave the same for your provided pixel values. Pixel is an absolute unit of measure, so the value that you provide is going to be fixed and would not be responsive. So if I resize the screen, you see the pixel is not responsive, it's a fixed image. The next unit of measure we are going to introduce would be percentage, and percentage is, if we see it, bloated the image a lot. So if I do 100%, you can see it nicely fits the entire width of the screen. But here's the thing, the percentage is the percentage of the container of current image. So if I go ahead and let's say use width equal to 50%, sorry, style equal to width colon 50%. So my entire body is now 50% wide. 100% of 50% is going to be 50% of the total screen area. So if I, let's say, make it 50% here as well. So now it's quarter of the entire width of the viewport because its container is taking 50% of the space and the image is taking additionally 50% of its container. I can only hope you have been enjoying the course so far because the hair pulling part is about to start just about now. To show what I mean, let me get rid of this and change fit to height. And you see, it immediately went off the scale. It's definitely more than 100% of the original height. See the scroll bar? Let me show you another point. So if I remove this, see, nothing happens. No change. This essentially means the image is being shown with its original height and width. And why is that? What happened is that browser determines width based on height of content of container. But when it comes to height, the height of container or containing block is set to auto. This is a CSS behavior where there is a slight difference between height and width. Just note that height being set to auto essentially means there is no reference point against which the percentage is being calculated. Percentage by definition is percentage of something, some number, some reference value, right? Rest assured, I will not go down this rabbit hole explaining why that happens in this video, as otherwise it is going to be an hour or hours long and we'll discuss nothing of images anymore. I'll just stop at saying that image has an intrinsic, default, or predefined height and width in its contents. Its wrappers like body have no height of their own. Their size is determined by size of its contents. Same is the case for div. Let me show you. Let's say I, but before doing that, let me show you something. So if let's say I go here and change percentage on body to pixels, then see 50 pixels is a very small value. Let me make it 500 pixels. Then it is height 50% is like 250 pixels high. And if I change it to let's say 100%, see it is responding because its ancestor chain somewhere has a concrete value defined. Now let's say I have a div present here somewhere in the middle and it is enclosed in div. And again, if I make it 50%, no change. But if I go to the div and say that I want that div to inherit the height from its parent, then the image would start responding to the size of the parent. But if I remove this from here or Control Z and make it percent again nothing. So again reiterating, div and body do not have a height of their own. They have no intrinsic height or width to begin with. Their size is determined by its children. And the child has a proper height and width. So if the ancestral chain is bringing the element a value of auto uh, and uh, and browser is evaluating the percentage against auto, this essentially means browser cannot determine the size of the image. So what it's going to do is it's going to fall back on the size of the image itself. So that is why it totally ignores the height value that is coming in form of percent because it means nothing. If these styles are removed, the value is still going to remain as auto by default. And so um, the browser is falling back on the image's intrinsic size, which is what you are seeing on the screen. So bottom line is a concrete value in the parent is going to work, but a non-concrete value or no value will not work. Let me show you here as well. So if I go uh, height colon um, 500 pixel on the div itself, it again responds because it just needs a concrete height being coming from its ancestral chain somewhere in the chain to respond properly to a percentage value. Now, this doesn't work, but what you can do is to get around, there's this VH value. So VH is basically something which essentially means the visible portion of the content area, which is from here to here, not including scroll bars, anything else, just the visible portion. So 1 VH is equal to 1% of the viewport height. And similarly, there exists VW, which essentially means the same. So it does respond. If I go 90%, it's going to respond. And this is happening without any concrete height or width being defined in the ancestral chain. So you can use those. But let me make one important point here. Do you remember we mentioned that there's a preference hierarchy in the styles where external CSS takes preference over internal CSS, which takes precedence over inline CSS. By preference, I mean how it should be. The opposite thing is that the style defined closest to element overrides coming from top. So if I have, let's say, anything defined above in the hierarchy, any style defined above in the hierarchy, and I define the same thing here, it's gonna take preference and cancel out or override anything coming from above. But here's one thing. See, I'm using the style attribute here, but let's say if I go and say height equal to and same 90VH, nothing happens, right? So just note that height here is HTML attribute. It's not the proper CSS way, and the height and width are supposed to be defined in pixels, and ideally they should be the intrinsic height and width of the image itself. But since we are giving it in some other units, that's not going to work. So for that to happen, we need to not assign value to the height attribute, but instead to the style attribute, which basically is the CSS style for that element. Okay, I think I have confused you enough. Assure you, I'm gonna clarify all those things in a dedicated video on CSS. When we come to CSS, these things will hopefully start making sense. I'm still saying hopefully because some people get by in their careers without that things making sense to them, but I'll try my best to make you understand. Going further, one more thing, one last thing. There are other styles like inches, centimeters, etc. So these would not fit well on a screen. So let's say I go ahead and say my width is 1 inch, right? It looks like an inch, but if you measure, it can be off. Don't expect this to be fully specific 1 inch being displayed on the screen. So basically, just keep in mind that the inches, centimeters, or such concrete measurement units, they are meant to be accurate on the paper if you are printing something, but on the screen, they are not guaranteed or not even recommended to be. There's a big probability that they would be off 1 inch if you measure them using a ruler right now on your device. So best to avoid them, use pixels or percentages or VH or VW in that case. I think that's enough for the units of measurement. Let's move on to the next items. The next item happens to be the file format support. So we have already seen PNG file in action. You can always use JPEG, GIF, etc. Here, I'm just going to demonstrate what goes on with SVG files. So for that, I'm going to replace this with a SVG file that I downloaded. I'm going to use it in another video as well, but just okay. Let's remove this 1 inch since that's too small, and let's say 300 pixels, right? It's super cool, super crisp. And what happens if I make it even bigger, like huge, 3000 pixels? Now let's try to find out where the text is real quick. See, no blurring, perfect text. In fact, let me go it 3 times more bigger, 3 times to those 3000 pixels. So it's 9000 pixels now. And you see there is no distortion, no pixelation at all. It's still super crisp edges and everything. That's why SVG is the W3C format, and you should always try it whenever you can. And just one more thing, let me copy paste an inline SVG example for you. So if I go here, Control V, and see, you can have inline SVGs as well with the same properties. So this is a circle being rendered, just and SVG is not coming from some external file. It's uh, just like plain old HTML, but a different format, and it's rendering it right in here. So that was it for the supported file formats. Let's go to the next item. All right, the next item is images are inline elements, right? You can pause and look at this slide and we can go back. Okay, so bringing our image back and not 9000 pixels, just 200 pixels is enough. All right. Okay, let me introduce some text before and after. So text before image and go to end, text after image. All right, you see the text is coming behind the image, but at a lower left corner of the image, and again for the on the lower right corner. And if I select it, see the blue selection marker is going all the way to the top of the image. Why is that? Let me show you. So if let's say I go here and with a keystroke change it from 200 to 20 pixels. See, and the text is coming smoothly between those two images. And if I save this and open it in browser, so let me bring up my browser. Here it is. And if I go and select inspect on this, expand div and hover over it, see it's taking as much space as needed to render the image itself. And that is because it is an inline image. Its display property is inline. You can't see it here, but if you go to the computed section on the elements tab and look for display, where is it? Here it is. See, its display property is inline. All right, let's compare it with another to make the point home. So I do control home, and in here I'm going to introduce text before paragraph and introduce the paragraph element. Hello world. Okay, and end text after paragraph. And just to distinguish, I'm gonna add a line break element in between. Okay, so see what's going on here. The text before paragraph ended here, and the paragraph came in its own line, and added another property that paragraph is prefixed and and suffixed by a line break, a separate line, you can say, and so the text after paragraph is appearing with a break. And if I save the file and go back to my browser and refresh, and now if we inspect the paragraph element, you see it's being highlighted to show that it is spanning the entire row. And if, let's say, I go to its display property is block. And let me show you something really cool that we can do with paragraph elements. So paragraph is a block element, and block elements take the entire width of their container. And in contrast, inline elements just take enough width for themselves. But the cool thing about Chrome browser is that you can experiment overriding any property, any style. So what I'm gonna do now is display and change the paragraph element to inline. Okay, here you go. So making it inline removed all the occupying entire width thing, and now it's fitting nicely between its previous and after text. So if I hover over the paragraph, see it's just taking enough space as the image was. Okay, that's it for the inline elements. Next up is responsive images. So if you recall, responsive images, this was the original slide from the other video. So basically the point was that responsive images are that if you squeeze or expand the browser window and the content area resizes, you specify, or even if not resizing, or even in the initial render, you can specify the min width or max width, the boundaries to which the element would be flexible and afterwards it would be rigid. So what do I mean by that? Let's take a look in Visual Studio Code. So for that I'm going to get rid of all the text and stuff, keeping it, and gonna take the style back to 200 pixel, let's say, or I say change it to min width to be, let's say, 600 pixels. Okay, which is pretty big. And I'm going to introduce width to be 80%. Okay, so you see it's occupying 80% of its container area. And to see it in action, we need to go back to the browser and refresh and resize. Okay, so see, I'm expanding it and the image is responding accordingly in both height and width, and ratio is maintained. In fact, let me bring the S inspector back, okay, which nicely brings up how much is the height and width of the content area right over here. So let me squeeze it. If you recall, our min width is 600 pixels. So do recall these numbers indicate the height and width of the content area, not the image itself. So we are going to see where the image starts to crop. So if we squeeze it a little bit more, and yeah, just about here. So 600, just around 600 points, the image stops being flexible. And to ensure that this is due to the min width property, this is we are going to refresh and retry, and now it should go all the way to 500 pixel. All right, so let's see max width in action as well. So I'm gonna say that its max width is 500 pixels. Okay, we saw this was the 500 pixel mark. So I'm gonna squeeze it right until here and refresh. Okay, so it is still 80% of the content area. So let me expand it, expanding, and right around here, it stopped expanding. Why? Because it has expanded to its maximum allowed limit, which is the 500 pixels. All right, that's about it for responsive images. Next up is lazy loading. So let me bring up its slide. So if you remember, lazy loading is any elements that do not belong in the content area or the above the fold or the first render portion of the web page and occur deep down somewhere. We can instruct the browser to not download them until we are about to reach that particular portion of the web page. And that is done using the loading attribute, and it has two values, eager and lazy, and eager is the default, so that is in action all the time, but we'll see what happens with lazy. So I'm going to go back, and to demonstrate that, I'm going to bring in another image. So image source equal to dot slash images slash face.png. All right, and alt equal to face. Here we go. Oh, sorry, I need to introduce width equal to 200 pixel. And since it's inline, it's gonna cause problems. So I'm gonna say 5 or 800 pixels so that it um, takes a bigger portion of the web page and we can see. Just to be sure, I'm gonna add a line break after each element and I'm gonna copy paste it a bunch of time, 5 times, let's say. Okay, here we go. Now we need to see it in browser. So for that, we would need this URL so that it doesn't load from disk. Otherwise, we won't be able to use our slow to crawl network configuration that we used in the rendering video. So if I go back to the network tab and I have the slow to crawl and disable cache configured. So okay, okay. So I think it's going with. I don't understand why the demo is not working. Oh, who's gonna add that loading attribute? Come on, guys. You should have reminded me. All right, so adding the lazy attribute here and going back and let's see if it fares any better. So just keep a look at here. So the face.png is being downloaded. The HTML is already done and see no reference to the SVG file. But keep your eyes here in this portion. I'm going to scroll down and see as soon as we are about to reach or scrolling near the image, the browser decides to download it. So it's downloaded by now, but let's see if we do it real quick. Like I'm going to press Control and let's see if it's there or not when we. All right, now keep your eyes on the bottom left corner of the video and look whether the gray image is there or not. Control and see it's not and it came up right now. All right, so that covers our demo for the lazy loading. We need to be real quick to not miss something. So going back to Visual Studio. Okay, next step is image captioning. Let me get rid of these and this is fine. So what I'm gonna do is introduce the figure element and inside I'm gonna add our image, cut and paste. And now I'm going to introduce fig caption. And fig caption is the caption that you provide. So this is the picture of a placeholder. And see, it is giving a standardized caption underneath the image. And let's see if we can add another image here. What happens? Dot slash images slash face.png, and this time I'm gonna give width of 200 pixels. Skipping the alt, which is a bad thing, but no problem for now. So making it a bit bigger. It was 500 pixels. Right, so now it has grouped both these items. So if we go back to our browser, all right, so now if we go to elements and have a look at this, this is the figure element. So if we add some elements before and after this figure element, it's gonna treat the entire group as one element, and this caption applies to all of them. So they are gonna move in sync here and there. All right, next up we have aligning with text. So what I'm gonna do for this is I'm gonna get rid of one of these pictures and fake caption like this. And what I'm going to do is introduce a head section to introduce a style head style. And the style that I want to do is image and float left. I'm going to explain what it is. Margin right, corner 10 pixel. Okay. So now I'm going to introduce some text around the image. And see, it's not appearing on the bottom right as it used to. It's now appearing on the top. And if I'm going to copy some text from another HTML file. Let's say this one, a little bit of this, and come back and paste it. And it's just started spelling here, and the image appeared. Okay, okay, see, the text is now going around the image like before. And to make the point that this is doing a aligning of image, if I remove this image styling, see, it creates this gap, the entire line height gap, because this line is covering the entire height until the height of the image. But if I introduce the style float, where did it go? Yeah, float left. So a float property specifies whether an element should just float freely inside a container, and all the other inline elements within that container are going to align themselves or wrap themselves around that element, just like we saw. We're going to explore float more in our CSS videos. I think it's enough time spent on this one. Let's go to the next item in our list, which is rounded images. Okay, so I'm gonna do Control Z, Control Z, Control Z to get it back. And here I'm going to introduce a border around the element. So to do that, I'm going to remove this and I'm going to say introduce a border radius. And as if you recall, we can introduce a border around any HTML element, but this has a border radius property which was used to round off the edges of that element. But we are gonna do excessive corner rounding and it's gonna eat into the content itself. So you see the result. It rounded the corner so much that this is giving the entire picture a rounded ellipse kind of shape. So you can play around with it even more, but we are lagging in terms of time. So I'm just gonna demonstrate until here and move to the next item in our list, which is clickable images. So to make an image clickable, it just needs to be wrapped inside a hyperlink element, which can reside inside our own code repository. We don't need to be fancy about it. And if we do Control X and paste it here, now the content of that hyperlink element is the image itself. And if I go here, see the mouse pointer changed to this hand icon. And if I click this, it's going to open the other HTML drawing that we created in a past video. Image colon hover effect to this and add box dash shadow 0, 0 ex. I'm going to explain it in a second. Yeah, okay. And now if we go here, see, cool border appears around the image, kind of indicating that this is a clickable image. I don't think we have enough time left to go into details of box shadow, but I can just quickly tell you that the values that we are specifying are x offset, y offset, blur radius, spread radius, and a color. So that's about it for box shadow. We can have a look, more detailed look later on. Okay, next up we had positioning images, which we are gonna defer to the next video since it requires a complicated explanation of the CSS position property. So we are not gonna cover in this one. We're already running out of time in this one. Transparent images was next, so we can look at it. That can be done quickly. So the property in question is opacity. So opacity is the opposite of transparency. So what I can do is it takes a value of 0 to 1 with decimal values allowed. So if, okay, so let's say I specify a value of 0.5. See, it just got a little bit dimmer, and if I go all the way 0.2, it's almost gone. And if let's say I do 0.1, you can hardly see it, and it would be gone at 0 and back at 1 at full opacity. So I think that's about it for the transparency. Next up, we have text overlays, which again, we would be deferring to the next video along with positioning since both require the same underlying concepts. Let's go directly to filters. Filters are applied on an image using a filter property or filter style. So if we see, let's say filter and see, there are a bunch of options that we can try out. So it's already grayscale, so we cannot try that. Let's try blur, and we have to specify a pixel value here. So let's say I give it a 4 pixel blur, and you can see the effect in action. We can try something else. We can do invert, and see it inverted the complete image. We can control the level of invertness using a percentage value as well to fine tune the effect. Other is opacity. Opacity can also be specified using a filter. So again, all of these take a percentage value, most of these at least. Contrast and give it, let's say, 300% contrast. So you see the gray part is almost gone. Similarly, there's brightness filter, which can also be controlled using, let's say I make it too bright. Okay, that is really too bright. Okay, we are controlling the brightness like this. So these are some of the filter options that are available. You can look up others online. That's what we are gonna cover in this slide. Right, we have covered almost everything in the video about images, the definitive guide to images video, I think, except for a few things which we are going to cover later on. If you liked my video, please do give a thumbs up and subscribe to be notified of upcoming videos. Thank you so much for watching. Have fun. Goodbye.